So this would often be the Sunday when I would preach on giving, but I'm not, because I'm preaching on Veterans Day. But you know it takes money for a church to go, and so may you keep the church going as much as you want to. This is a free and open organization, and we will live within our budget because that's what we do. And so that is today. There are quite a few empty pews today. There are people who are visiting family, are out and about, and so we know that what we get today is not going to be the final count. But this is part of our process. Every year we make our budget and take care of things. And we've been doing it for more than 100 years now. So since World War I was going on when this church began. That sounds about right. All right. This is an interesting Veterans Day for me because I've had a really good week being with veterans. And I so much appreciate the veterans I've visited this week, and they reminded me that veterans are real people. And they think, and they read, and they study, and they know some things. And that all of us need to be careful that we don't just think that we speak for veterans, but we need to hear them all. And we need to see and hear the ones we like and the ones we don't like. Because veterans disagree with each other. They're free thinkers in terms of how things ought to be. So on Veterans Day, I think the best thing to do as a follower of Jesus Christ is love and respect and care for the actual real veterans that are about us. And see who they are and listen to their stories. Thomas Hobbes is a philosopher who believed that we needed strong governments because government is part of how we live together as people. And if we didn't have strong governments, we would be prey to invasions from outsiders. And if we didn't have a strong government, we might become a failed state and have civil chaos where everyone is against everyone. The fantasy that, boy, wouldn't it be nice if we could get rid of the government, is not something that's worked out very well in history. In history, when there hasn't been some kind of strong government, and it's been warlords or gangs or people just shooting each other or, in the old days, stabbing each other. But the point is that Hobbes seems to be onto something, and that is we do need to have law and order and security for us to be able to live together as peacefully as possible. There's a saying from the Proverbs which says, "A wise woman builds her house. A foolish woman tears it down with her own hands." So when we speak about the military, we speak about our veterans, and we speak about, yes, our government, difficult and challenged though it is certainly better than no government. Because instead of people then just living together as noble savages peacefully, often what happens is they just start smashing each other. And you end up with a lot of petty little warlords, and we've seen this many times. This is what Paul writes to the Romans in Romans 13. He says, "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities." Now, he was speaking in the days of the Roman Empire. So these were not easy. This was not an easy government to like in some ways. It was blasphemous because the Caesar would claim to be a divine being, and this was something that was not something that Christians or Jews believed, or many other people either. But it was the government they had. So with that in mind, Paul writes to the Romans, which is where the empire was founded. It's like writing to Washington. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and those authorities that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. So he's saying it's good to have government, and it's good to work with the government, and if you go against it and get in trouble, don't be surprised. And he's saying that having government is actually God's will for the world. But boy, it's hard to see, isn't it? Because sometimes governments seem pretty bad, don't they? But that's what Paul writes about the Romans. He says, rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Do you wish to have no fear of the authority? Then do what's good, and you will receive its approval. For it is God's servant for your good. But if you do what is wrong, you should be afraid, for the authorities do not bear the sword in vain. It is the servant of God to execute wrath on the wrongdoer. So again, he's saying there needs to be laws. The laws need to be done, and he talks about people who are criminals, essentially, will be brought to justice by the government system. And he sees this as God's will here in Romans 13. And he says, therefore, one must be subject not only because of the wrath, but because of conscience. For the same reason you also pay taxes. So there you go. Taxes are old. And the idea about taxes is that it's not that there's something sinful or wrong or bad about taxes. Taxes is what it takes for government to work. And the problem we have is when taxes are not going where, it's kind of like this. You give a kid candy, you're happy. You gave the kid candy. You know, you take care, you build a school, you're happy. What you don't want to see is you don't want to see corrupt misuse and abuse of the money. That's where the problem is, which is why you can give to Park Church pretty safely, I believe, because we've got open books, and we're a small group, and we can all watch each other, and you can pretty much know where every penny is going. And I can't tell you a couple times, Sarah Wade, our blessed, where are you, Sarah? She went to be downstairs with getting ready for the counting. She's found there's an error, and she's found it because she's good at that. Every church needs someone like Sarah because somebody actually reads the monthly financial stuff. And so she's like that. I'm saying that taxes, death and taxes, sure enough. But they're not a bad thing if the organization, the better the organization is, the more willing we are to support it. Now the Romans may not have been the best organization, but the same way, Paul says, for the same reason you also pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants, busy with this very thing. Pay to all what's due them, taxes to whom taxes are due, revenue to whom revenue is due, respect to whom respect is due, honor to whom honor is due. And so Paul is saying governments and states are a fact of life, and they're good. They're better than the alternative, so pay your taxes, give your respect, be a good citizen. So we thank Paul for that. And for that, we think about our veterans and the idea of veterans carrying forward the safety and the protection of hearth and home. It was in the 1970s that the Department of War, or the War Department, was changed to the Department of Defense. So the idea was that the military is supposed to be a defender, not an attacker. It's supposed to be something we do to protect hearth and home. The idea of the movie Dances with Wolves is that he gives the guns to the natives he's with to protect them from the people that are attacking the women and children. And we want that. We want our women and children to be safe. And it takes organization for that. And it takes laws. And it takes enforcement. And even if we have difficulties with policemen planting drugs on people or driving people around a van and killing them, and just really, really bad things that happen, not just in this country, but around the world. But still, who are you going to call? Who are you going to call? When our garage door was left open on Colburn Street, and somebody said, your garage is open, we didn't just walk back out into the garage to see if someone was there. We called the police, and they came, and they looked it over, and we locked the garage up. So thank God for the police. Who are you going to call? Thank God for the firemen. And thank God for the men and the women who serve our country. Along those lines, poppies. What is this thing with poppies? You see them if you... it comes from, I think, this poem, which was written by John McCrae in 1915. It's Flanders Fields. And it talks about how we need to continue to protect our society. And this is how it goes. In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row, that mark our place. And in the sky, the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard among the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields. It was written in 1915 by an officer in the British Army after someone at a service where he was responsible to speak for the death of someone else in his unit. And so when we go to our veterans and we say, what do you think? What's it about? They'll say, we defended our country. But you know, there's another side too. My friend Sam Buer talks about a soldier that came to him and he said, I can't come to church because of this hat. And Sam said, what are you talking about? And he showed him his hat, and it was his military hat. And he said, because of the things that I did when I was wearing this hat, God will never forgive me. And I know I can't come to church. Sad, sad. Yes, for some it is a Flanders Field story, but for others it is a different story. This other part of it is that wars are supposed to be fought justly, by just authority, with a just cause, with right intention, when only as a last resort. They should be proportional, they should discriminate between combatants and non-combatants, and they should be responsible for the damages done within reason. All those are Augustine's rules of just war. And so it is that young men and women, for duty, for honor, for service, for caring for their communities, get out to war they go. And what I want you to know is there are very few countries that don't have veterans or militaries in them. And when you think about World War II with the Germans, for example, who were they? They were Roman Catholics and Lutherans and Reformed. And very few pastors had the courage to speak up against it. The ones that did, those crazy Jehovah's Witnesses, give them respect when they come to your door for nothing else but for that. They are one of the only Christian groups that really stood up to Hitler. I don't believe in the things they teach and stuff like that, but I give them full respect for being able to stand up at a time when the Lutherans didn't, when the Reformed didn't, when the Roman Catholics didn't. Horrible, horrible things were done. And so it's the same way in World War I, when, you know, we were all pretty much Christians out killing each other. It was difficult things, this war stuff, and how we fit into it. And so, like the man who said to Sam, I wore this hat, and now I just can't imagine going to church because God, the things I've seen, the things I've done. Listen to the story of the soldiers who crucified Jesus. From Mark 15, 15 to 39. This is what it says. So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. Then the soldiers led him into the courtyard of the palace, that is the governor's headquarters, and they called together the whole cohort. And they clothed him in a purple cloak, and after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on him, and they began saluting him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They struck his head with a reed, spat on him, and knelt down in homage to him. After mocking him, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put on his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. And the story goes on. But what I want you to see is that I could easily imagine one of them saying, we took a man who had done nothing wrong, and we had no reason why we had to do all this extra stuff to him, but it just seemed like fun at the time. Those were strange days. But oh, I regret them now. And so it is for me as a pastor. There's a difference between men I've known and women, but I don't know any women that were in this situation yet, but men who have been at the tip of the spear where the killing happens. It's different. It's different. And it is difficult. And I hear their stories with respect. Those few that have been willing to tell me them. But it's not easy, sisters and brothers. It's not easy. And so when we listen to our veterans, we listen to the I throw the torch to you, keep it going, our society, our country. But there's the other side too, which is the things I did in this hat, things are not so good. This is a poem by Wilfred Owen, also from World War I. And it's called Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. Smart guy, huh? He lived through a number of years. He served as an infantry commander, and he almost made it through the war. He was killed, I think, in the very last month of the war. And Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori means it is a sweet and beautiful thing to die for one's country. So please forgive me for reading this, but this is also the words of a veteran. And this is both of these are from the one I did earlier about Flanders Fields, and this one are both from men who were there. This is his poem. Dulce et decorum est. Bent double like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through the sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep, many had lost their boots, but limped on bloodshot, all went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf, even to the hoots of gas shells dropping softly behind. Gas! Gas! Quick, boys! An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time, but someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime, dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea I saw him drowning. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon where we flung him in and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face like a devil sick of sin, if you could hear at every jolt the blood come gurgling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud, of vile and incurable sores on innocent tongues, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. And so there you have it, Veterans Day. Not an imaginary Veterans Day, but a real Veterans Day with real veterans. They are among us, they are us, and the best thing we can do as Christians is to listen to all of our veterans and respect all of our veterans and hear their stories and help them, and let them help you. Let them help you learn both sides of the difficulties and the joys of service. So for you veterans today, I salute you. I thank you. I am sorry for those who suffered greatly. I'm glad you lived. It is in every world, in every country. But to you veterans, thank you. So, listen to Paul in Romans 13. But listen also to Mark in Mark chapter 15. Because violence is like that. Now this brings me to the conclusion of my part, and it doesn't seem like much of a time to say, okay, so now bring your pledges up, does it? It's kind of like another world altogether. If there's a tie-in, it's the Flanders Field and the passing of the torch. And that is, we are not veterans here of the military, but we are also those who have been passed the torch of those who have been before us at Park Church. Some of us have been here for just a few months, and some of us have been here for generations. But in any case, I pray that you support and believe in who we are and what we are doing. So I was with Tom Booz this week, and we went down to a rehab center, a live-in center for people who are on opium, and these are people who are addicted, and it was for narcotics or alcohol, whatever it was. People can live with them a couple of years. The mental health problems of veterans, the suicide rate and the drug abuse rate for veterans is higher than the general population. There are a lot of hurting men and women out there who aren't being listened to, who aren't finding a way into the American dream, and we want to help them with that. So I was there with Tom Booz at this center in East Toledo, and I wish he was up here to say to you the things that he said about us at Park Church, because if you did, you'd give us all your money. He said, we are a church that's really loving. And he said, we are a church that's really serving. And he said some other nice stuff too. But I was just like, wow. So I pray that we may be, everything that Tom said about us, that we may be a church that is loving and is serving, that we may be a church worthy of being supported. Thank you.